Hi, second grade. We're continuing James and the Giant Peach. We're starting today on chapter 29. The last thing that happened was that Centipede had a huge bucket of purple paint dumped on him, and it is sticking to his whole body, and he is desperate. Please help me, wash it off, scrape it off, anything. Chapter 29. It seemed like a long time before the seagulls were able to pull the peach away from that horrible rainbow cloud, but they managed it at last. And then everybody gathered around the wretched Centipede and began arguing about the best way to get the paint off his body. He really did look a sight. He was purple all over, and now that the paint was beginning to dry and harden, he was forced to have to sit very stiff and upright, as though he were encased in cement. And all 42 of his legs were sticking out straight in front of him like rods. He tried to say something, but his lips wouldn't move. All he could do now was just to make gargling noises in his throat. The old green grasshopper reached out and touched him carefully on the stomach. But how could it possibly have dried so quickly, he asked. Well, it's rainbow paint, James answered. Rainbow paint dries very quick and very hard. I detest pain, Miss Spider announced. It frightens me. It reminds me of Aunt Spiker, the late Aunt Spiker. I mean, because the last time she painted her kitchen ceiling, my poor darling grandmother stepped into it by mistake, and when it was still wet, there she stuck. And all through the night we could hear her calling to us, saying, "Help, help, help." It was just heartbreaking to listen to her. But what could we do? Not a thing until the next day when the paint had dried. And then, of course, we all rushed over to her and calmed her down and gave her some food. Believe it or not, she lived for 6 months like that, upside down on the ceiling with her legs stuck permanently in the paint. She really did. We fed her every day. We brought her fresh flies straight from the web. But then on the 26th of April last April, Aunt Sponge, the late Aunt Sponge, happened to glance up at the ceiling and spotted her. "A spider!" she cried. "A disgusting spider! Quick, fetch me the mop with the long handle." And then, oh, it was so awful, and I can't bear to think of it. Miss Spider wiped away a tear and looked sadly at the Centipede. "You poor thing," she murmured. "I do feel sorry for you." "It'll never come off," the earthworm said brightly. "Our Centipede will never move again. He will turn into a statue, and we shall be able to put him in the middle of the lawn with a bird bath on top of his head." "We could try peeling him like a banana," the old green grasshopper suggested. "Or rubbing him with sandpaper," the ladybug said. "Now, if he stuck out his tongue," the earthworm said, smiling a little for perhaps the first time in his life, "if he stuck it out really far, then we could all catch hold of it and start pulling. And if we pulled hard enough, we could turn him inside out, and then he would have a new skin." Not realistic. Then a pause while the others considered this interesting proposal. "I think," James said slowly, "I think that the best thing to do," then he stopped. "What was that?" he asked quickly. "I heard a voice. I heard someone shouting." And here we see a picture of poor Centipede covered entirely in paint. You can see him right there on the side and all of his friends looking at him and trying to figure out how on earth they're going to fix this terrible problem. Chapter 30. They all raised their heads listening. Shh, there it is again. But the voice was too far away for them to hear what it was saying. "It's a cloud man," Miss Spider cried. "I just know it's a cloud man. They're after us again." "It came from above," the earthworm said, and automatically everyone looked upward. Everyone except the Centipede, who of course couldn't move. "Ouch," they said. "Help, mercy, we're going to catch it this time." For what they now saw, swirling and twisting directly over their heads, was an immense black cloud, a terrible, dangerous, thundery-looking thing that began to rumble and roar even as they were staring at it. And then from high up on the top of the cloud, a faraway voice came down at them once again, this time very loud and clear. "On with the faucets," it shouted. "On with the faucets! On with the faucets!" Like a sink faucet. 3 seconds later, the whole underneath of the cloud seemed to split and burst open like a paper bag, and then out came the water. They saw it coming. It was quite easy to see because it wasn't just raindrops. It wasn't raindrops at all. It was a great solid mass of water that might have been a lake or a whole ocean dropping out of the sky on top of them. And down it came, down and down and down, crashing first onto the seagulls and then onto the peach itself. While the poor travelers shrieked with fear and groped around frantically for something to catch hold of, the peach stem, the silk strings, anything they could find. And all the time the water came pouring and roaring down upon them. I picture like a waterfall dumping on them. Bouncing and smashing and sloshing and slashing and swashing and swirling and surging and whirling and gurgling and gushing and rushing and rushing. And it was like being pinned down underneath the biggest waterfall in the world and not being able to get out. And here is a picture of what that might have looked like. Here they are. And there's that huge waterfall dumping right on their heads. Yikes. That would have been scary. They couldn't speak, they couldn't see, they couldn't breathe. And James Henry Trotter, holding on madly to one of the silk strings above the peach stem, told himself that this must surely be the end of everything at last. But then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. They were out of it, and it was all over. The wonderful seagulls had flown right through it and had come out safely on the other side. Once again, the giant peach was sailing peacefully through the mysterious moonlit sky. "I am drowned," gasped the green grasshopper, spitting out water by the pint. "It's gone right through my skin," the earthworm groaned. "I always thought my skin was waterproof, but it isn't, and now I'm full of rain." Look at me," shouted the centipede excitedly. "It's washed me clean. The paint's all gone. I can move again." "Well, that's the worst news I've heard in a long time," the earthworm said. The centipede was now dancing around the deck and sometimes somersaults in the air, turning somersaults in the air and singing at the top of his voice, "Oh, hooray for the storm and the rain. I can move. I don't feel any pain. And now I'm a pest. I'm the biggest and best, the most marvelous pest once again." "Oh, do stop," the old green grasshopper said. "Look at me," cried the centipede. "Look at me. I am free. I am free. Not a scratch nor a bruise or a bleed. To his grave this fine gent they all thought they had sent, and I very near went. Oh, I very near went. But they sent quite the wrong centipede." Chapter 31. "How fast are we all going all of a sudden?" the ladybug said. "I wonder why." "I don't think the seagulls like this place any better than we do," James answered. "They feel like they're moving more quickly. I imagine they want to get out of this as soon as they can. They got a bad fright in the storm we've just had, though." Faster and faster flew the seagulls, skimming across the sky at a tremendous pace, with the peach trailing out behind them. Cloud after cloud went by on either side, all of them ghostly white in the moonlight, and several more times during the night the travelers caught glimpses of cloudmen moving around on tops of these clouds, working their sinister magic upon the world below. Once they passed a snow machine in operation, with the cloudmen turning the handle and a blizzard of snowflakes blowing out of the great funnel above. They saw the huge drums that were used for making thunder, and the cloudmen beating them ferociously with long hammers. They saw the frost factories and the wind producers and the places where cyclones and tornadoes were manufactured and sent spinning down toward the earth. And once, deep in the hollow of a large billowy cloud, they spotted something that could have only been a cloudman's city. There were caves everywhere, running into the cloud, and at the entrances to the caves, the cloudmen's wives were crouching over little stoves with frying pans in their hands, frying snowballs for their husbands' suppers. And hundreds of cloudmen's children were frisking about all over the place and shrieking with laughter and sliding down the billows of the cloud on toboggans, sleds. An hour later, just before dawn, the travelers heard a soft whooshing noise above their heads, and they glanced up and saw an immense gray bat-like creature swooping down toward them out of the dark. It circled around and around the peach, flapping its great wings slowly in the moonlight and staring at the travelers. Then it uttered a series of long, deep, melancholy, which means like happy-ish, sad-ish, kind of a strange sound, cries, and flew off again into the night. "Oh, I do wish the morning would come," Miss Spider said, shivering all over. "Won't be long now," James answered. "Look, it's getting lighter over there already." They all sat in silence, watching the sun as it came up slowly over the rim of the horizon for a new day. We know the horizon is where the ocean meets the sky. So for them, being so high up on the peach, the horizon probably looks a little lower. All right, I'm going to show you a picture. It's kind of difficult to see what that might be. It almost looks like some sort of a dragon or something. I can see the shadow, and I see the peach being pulled by the seagulls still through the sky. And there's the ocean below and the sky above and all the clouds. Interesting. Chapter 32. And when full daylight came at last, they all got to their feet and stretched their poor cramped bodies. And the centipede, who always seemed to see things first, shouted, "Look, there's land below!" "Yay!" "He's right," they cried, running to the edge of the peach and peering over. "Hooray, hooray! It looks like streets and houses, but how enormous it all is." A vast city, glistening in the early morning sunshine, lay spread out 3,000 feet below them. At that height, the cars were like little beetles crawling along the streets, and people walking on the pavements looked no longer larger than tiny grains of soot. Soot is like ash from a fireplace. But what tremendous tall buildings, exclaimed the ladybug. I've never seen anything like them before in England. Which town do you think it is? Well, this couldn't possibly be England, said the old green grasshopper. Then where is it? Where are we? Asked Miss Spider. You know what those buildings are, shouted James, jumping up and down with excitement. Those are skyscrapers. So this must be America, and that, my friends, means that we have crossed the Atlantic Ocean overnight. You don't mean it, they cried. It's not possible. It's incredible. It's unbelievable. Oh, I've always dreamed of going to America, cried the centipede. I had a friend once who... Oh, be quiet, said the earthworm. Who cares about your friend? The thing we've got to think about now is how on earth we are going to get down to Earth. Ask James, said the ladybug. Well, I don't think that should be very difficult, James told them. All we have to do is cut loose a few seagulls. Not many, mind you, but just enough so that the others can't quite keep us in the air. Then down we shall go, slowly and gently until we reach the ground. Centipede will bite through the strings for us, one at a time. You think it'll work? Chapter 33. Far below them, in the city of New York City, something like pandemonium was breaking out. Again, pandemonium just, of course, means chaos. A great round ball as big as a house had been sighted hovering high in the city over the very center of Manhattan. And the cry had gone up that it was an enormous bomb sent by another country to blow the whole city to smithereens, which means a billion tiny pieces. Air raid sirens were wailing in every section. All the radio and television programs were interrupted with announcements that the population must go down into their cellars immediately. They were in danger. 1 million people walking in the streets on their way to work looked up in the sky and saw the monster hovering above them and started running for the nearest subway entrance to take cover. Generals grabbed hold of telephones and shouted orders at everyone they could think of. The mayor of New York City called up the president of the United States down in Washington, D.C. to ask him for help, and the president, who at that moment was having breakfast in his pajamas, that's important to know. Quickly, he was having breakfast in his pajamas, the president. He quickly pushed away his half-finished plate of sugar crisps and started pressing buttons right and left to summon, which means call, his admirals and his generals, and all the way across the vast stretch of America, in all 50 states, from Alaska to Florida, from Pennsylvania to Hawaii, the alarm was sounded, and the whole word went out that the biggest bomb in the history of the world was hovering over New York City, and that at any moment it might go off. That is not what is happening. But pandemonium, panic, and here is a picture of what that might have looked like. I'm having a hard time with my... Let me back that up a little bit. There you go. So there's the peach floating above the city with all the tall skyscrapers there. And there's everybody down below, panicking, running around like crazy, fearing for their lives, thinking that this is the biggest bomb that's ever been over New York City. Chapter 34. Come on, centipede, bite through the first string, James ordered. The centipede took one of the silk strings between his teeth and bit through it. And once again, but not with an angry cloudman dangling from the end of the string this time, a single seagull came away from the rest of the flock and went flying on its own. Bite another, James ordered. The centipede bit through another string. Why aren't we sinking? We are sinking. No, we're not. Don't forget the peach is a lot lighter now than it was when we started off, James told him. It's an awful lot of juice when all those hailstones hit it in the night. Cut away 2 more seagulls, centipede. Ah, that's better. Here we go. Now we are really sinking. Descending, if you will. Going down. Yes, this is perfect. Don't bite any more, centipede, or we'll sink too fast. Gently does it. Slowly the peach, the great peach, began losing height, and the buildings and streets down below began coming closer and closer. Well, do you think we'll get our pictures in the papers when we get down? The ladybug asked. My goodness, I've forgotten to polish my boots, the centipede said. Everyone must help me to polish my boots before we arrive. Oh, for heaven's sake, said the earthworm. Can't you ever stop thinking about... But he never finished his sentence, for suddenly, whoosh! They looked up and saw a huge 4-engined plane come shooting out of a nearby cloud and go whizzing past them, not more than 20 feet over their heads. This was actually the regular early morning passenger plane coming in from New York to Chicago. And as it went by, it sliced right through every single one of the silken strings. And immediately, oh no, the seagulls broke away, every single one of them. And the enormous peach, having nothing to hold it up in the air any longer, went tumbling down toward the earth like a lump of lead. Help! Cried the centipede. Save us! Cried Miss Spider. We are lost! Cried the ladybug. This is the end, cried the old green grasshopper. James, cried the earthworm, do something, James, quickly do something. I can't, cried James. I'm sorry, goodbye. Close your eyes, everyone, it won't be long now. Chapter 35. Round and upside down went the peach as it plummeted, which means fell very fast, toward the earth. And they all went clinging desperately to the stem to save themselves from being flung into space. Faster and faster and faster it fell, down and down and down and down, racing closer and closer to the houses and streets below, where it would surely smash into a million pieces when it hit. And all the way along Fifth Avenue and Madison Avenue and all along the other streets in the city, people who had not yet reached the underground shelters looked up and saw it coming, and they stopped running and stood there staring in a sort of stupor at what they thought was the biggest bomb in all the world falling out of the sky onto their heads. A few women screamed. Others knelt down on the sidewalks and began praying out loud. Strong men turned to one another and said things like, well, I guess this is it, Joe. And goodbye, everybody. Goodbye. And for the next 30 seconds, the whole city held its breath, waiting for the end to come. Chapter 36. These are very short chapters. That's why I'm doing a lot. Goodbye, Ladybug, gasped James, clinging to the stem of the falling peach. Goodbye, Centipede. Goodbye, everybody. There were only a few seconds to go now. And it looked as though they were going to fall right in among the tallest buildings. James could see the skyscrapers rushing up to meet them at the most awful speed, and most of them had square, flat tops. But the very tallest of them all had a top that tapered off in a long, sharp point, like an enormous silver needle sticking up into the sky. This is how most of the buildings in New York City, there are a few, they have a long needle sticking up in the sky. It was precisely onto the top of this needle that the peach fell. There was a squelch. The needle went in deep, and suddenly there was a giant peach caught and spiked upon the very pinnacle of the Empire State Building. And we're going to stop there for today, and we're going to pick up on chapter 37 tomorrow. There they are. The peach has stopped right there on top of the Empire State Building in New York City. Crazy. I wonder how they're going to get down. We'll find out tomorrow. Bye.